You open your eyes to the soft glow of sunlight filtering through a tiny, cracked window. The room is dim, claustrophobic. The walls are rough and unfinished. The scent that greets you is not the crisp smell of fresh morning air. No, it is a thick, pungent blend of animal dung, sweat, smoke from last night's oil lamp, and something vaguely metallic. It clings to your nostrils and sinks into your skin. Welcome to the Roman Empire. You are not in a villa, not even close. You are in a third-story room of an insula, a Roman apartment building. This one, like many others, is made of wood and brick, and it leans just slightly to one side, as if it has grown weary of standing upright. These buildings often caught fire or collapsed. Yours hasn't yet. The mattress beneath you is little more than straw stuffed into a sack, and it itches. Itches in a way that only straw crawling with unseen bugs can. There is no blanket. The tunic you wore yesterday is your blanket. You are still wearing it, and it's still damp from yesterday's sweat. That's normal. No one changes clothes every day here. Laundry is a rare luxury reserved for the rich and for special occasions. What you have is what you wear, and what you wear is what you sleep in. You rise, head spinning slightly from the humidity and the smoke. The air is heavy and close. There is no ventilation. The small clay lamp in the corner has long burned out, leaving a greasy soot smear along the cracked wall. Downstairs, you hear the noises that make up the Roman morning. Carts clatter along the cobbled street, iron-rimmed wheels screeching against stone. Donkeys bray. Someone yells in coarse Latin, and someone else answers in Greek. Rome is loud. Rome is always loud. There is no such thing as silence in this city of over 1 million souls. You cough. The air is thick, not just with heat, but with dust and smoke, and the ever-present temps of urine.
Oh.
There is a bucket in the corner of the room. You relieve yourself into it. That bucket will be emptied later into the street below, just like every other bucket in every other insula. Your neighbors are already awake. You can hear them above and below you, beside you, through the walls that are thin enough to pass conversation. Someone is arguing. Someone is singing. Somewhere, a baby is crying, and no one seems to be doing anything about it. There is no sink, no tap, no glass of fresh water waiting for you. If you want water, you'll need to walk to a public fountain down the street, carrying a jug. It might be clean, or it might not. To clean yourself, you pour cold water from a clay pot over your hands. There is no soap. Romans use olive oil to clean their bodies, rubbing it in, then scraping it off with a curved metal tool called a strigil. You do not own a strigil. You have hands, and maybe a cloth. Maybe. Breakfast. Don't expect much. The Romans didn't have eggs and bacon in the morning. If you're poor, which you probably are, you might eat a piece of bread. Yesterday's, if you're lucky, maybe soaked in watered-down wine. Milk is for children. Root is rare. Or cheese is a treat. There is no coffee, no tea. The idea of caffeine is centuries away. You might work today. You might spend the day looking for work. You could be a laborer, a messenger, a cleaner, or a seller of small wares. It's the kind of job that requires nothing more than hands, a voice, and the ability to stand in the sun for hours. Before leaving, you slip on your sandals. They are made of worn leather, thin-soled, and offer no protection against the filth of the street. Streets in Rome are not clean. There is no sanitation department. Human waste, animal dung, rotting food, dead rats, all of it lies just beyond your doorway. The gutter runs down the middle of the street. In theory, it carries waste away. In practice, it pools and festers. You step out into the world. The sun is brighter than you remember. The smell intensifies. The heat is already rising and the day has barely begun. You are jostled immediately by a man carrying in fish sauce, mutters something under his breath. You can smell the garum even before you see it. A salty, sour stench that invades your throat. Children run past. Goat bleats. Somewhere, a street performer is playing the double flute. The sound is strange and discordant. A woman with a basket of bread shouts out her prices. A group of men in togas walk past, debating politics or poetry or something in between. And here you are, just another Roman, already tired, already hungry, already smelling of everything around you. You have survived exactly 1 hour in ancient Rome. Congratulations, only 23 more to go. And no, it doesn't get better. You need to relieve yourself. That's not unusual. It's morning in ancient Rome. Your stomach is already uneasy from yesterday. Bread soaked in wine, and whatever bits of dried meat or cheese you scavenged at midday. But you know what comes next, and it fills you with a kind of dread that doesn't come from your intestines. There are no private toilets in your apartment. None. Not even a hole in the floor with a cover. Instead, there's a shared chamber pot in your corner of the insula, if you're lucky. A small clay container that everyone uses. It stinks. That is full. You dump it in the gutter outside and wipe your hands on the fabric of your tunic. There's no soap, no sanitizer, no awareness of germs. The Roman nose adapts, or you suffer. If you want a more civilized option, you have to head to the local public latrine. The Romans, in their infinite pride, built hundreds of them throughout the city. These latrines were marvels of engineering, they said. And indeed, from a distance, they are. They are stone benches with holes carved at regular intervals. Some are round, some are oval. Beneath the bench flows a shallow channel of water that constantly moves. A second, lower gutter runs just in front of the seating area. That's for your sponge. Yes, sponge. There is no toilet paper. You and everyone else use a communal sponge on a stick, a tersorium, which rests in the lower water channel. You use it, you rinse it, you leave it. Then the next person comes along. The sponge smells of vinegar, sometimes of waste, always. There is no way to fully clean it. Thought makes your stomach churn worse than before. But you have no choice. The latrine is a social space. You do not sit alone. There are no walls, no partitions. Just a long bench and a line of people, shoulder to shoulder, squatting or sitting, doing their business. Senators and slaves, foreigners and citizens. It's all equal in excrement. The floor is damp, slippery. Water from the channels mixes with human waste. There are no drains as we know them. The engineers did their best, but it's no match for the daily flow of thousands of Romans. Rats scurry, flies swarm. Sometimes you hear a splash from down below. Not water, not always. The risk of disease here is high. Dysentery, typhoid, parasites. No one knows what causes them. Not really. The word germ hasn't been invented. Illness is blamed on bad air, evil spirits, or an imbalance of the humors. Sometimes something worse than disease happens. Explosions. Yes, explosions. Methane gas from the sewers builds up in the dark tunnels below. And with the help of a spark from an oil lamp or even static, it ignites. There are recorded cases of people being killed by flaming jets from toilet holes. You keep your head down. You avoid eye contact. But some people don't. They chat. They gossip. They discuss politics and the weather and who is having an affair with whose slave. The Roman toilet is not a place for quiet reflection. There are no attendants handing you towels. There's no music playing softly in the background. There is the stench of ammonia and the clatter of sandals on stone and the ever-present knowledge that you are never, ever clean. When you finish, you rise, pull down your tunic, and step carefully around the puddles. You leave behind your dignity. You try not to think about the sponge. You breathe through your mouth as you exit into the slightly fresher stench of the Roman street. You do not wash your hands. No one does. You rub them on your clothes, or you scrape them with a bit of broken pottery or a cloth. Sometimes, if you're lucky, there's a fountain nearby where you can rinse them off. But no one waits in line to do that. Children run by barefoot. Vendors pass by with bread and olives. A soldier walks past, adjusting his armor. You just survived the Roman toilet, and you will have to do it again, probably by noon. It's time to eat. You're hungry. And maybe it's mid-morning, or maybe you've skipped that first meal entirely, as many Romans did. The way your stomach is growling and you begin the search for food. Let us get one thing clear up front. If you're expecting a meal like you defined in the modern world, you're going to be sorely disappointed. There is no coffee to jolt you awake. No toast, no eggs, no buttered croissant. Not even a sweet fruit smoothie to cleanse your palate. You begin your Roman food journey with a staple, bread. It's hard, not just a little hard, but jackingly difficult. This bread is made from coarse flour, sometimes adulterated with chalk or bits of grit to make it go further. It might still contain small stones from the millstone used to grind the grain. Romans often wore their teeth down early in life from chewing this kind of bread. Dip it in watered-down wine. Romans don't drink wine straight unless they're drunkards or trying to make a point. The wine is rough, vinegary, sometimes spiced, and almost always diluted. It tastes like someone tried to pickle a raisin. Now comes the real flavor bomb of Roman cuisine. Garum. Garum is a fermented fish sauce. It's made by layering fish guts, whole fish, herbs, and salt into vats and letting them sit under the sun for weeks or even months. As the fish decompose, a pungent liquid oozes out. That's garum. It is strained, bottled, and poured liberally on almost everything. Romans love it, you. Probably not. Imagine the most intense anchovy paste you've ever smelled. Then multiply that by the summer heat of a Mediterranean courtyard and let it ferment in your mind. The smell alone is enough to turn your stomach. The taste is salty, fishy, and sour. Lingers on your tongue, in your nose, and in your nightmares. But it's everywhere. In stews, on bread, mixed with wine, used as medicine. Garum is the ketchup, soy sauce, and Worcestershire sauce of ancient Rome, all in one. You can't escape it. If you're lucky or moderately wealthy, you might enjoy a wider range of foods. Pulse, a porridge made from spelt or barley, is a common dish. It's bland, extremely bland. Think oatmeal without milk, sugar, or fruit. Maybe it's livened up with some herbs or cheese, but it's mostly filler. Then there are olives. Romans love olives. Salty, preserved in oil or brine, and often past their prime. They're chewy and tangy, and occasionally stuffed with nuts or herbs. They are also one of the few things that dainties seem totally foreign to a modern palate. Cheese exists, but it's not smooth or spreadable. It's hard, crumbly, and sour. Fresh milk is for children, and the lack of refrigeration means dairy products are often a gamble. And then there's the meat. Meat is a luxury. Most Romans don't eat it daily. When they do, it's usually pork, sometimes goat, rarely beef. The cuts are tough, but the seasoning is strange to you. Honey, vinegar, herbs like lovage, and rue that modern kitchens rarely use. The Romans don't have chili peppers, potatoes, or tomatoes. Spices are expensive. Most meals are heavily reliant on salt, vinegar, and garum. Occasionally, especially at feasts, exotic dishes are served. Dormice stuffed with nuts and herbs, flamingo tongue, jellyfish, roasted peacock with feathers reapplied after cooking. These aren't everyday foods, but they exist, and they speak volumes about Roman taste. And if you're a slave, you might eat the scraps. Bread crusts soaked in wine, bits of fat and gristle, whatever the master or mistress leaves behind. There is no such thing as dignity in a Roman kitchen if you re on the lowest rung of the ladder. Water is risky. The aqueducts bring water from the mountains, and it's a marvel of engineering. But the pipes are made of lead. Yes, lead. Romans didn't know the dangers of lead poisoning. The elite drank from lead pipes every day. Lead cookware was also common. If the fish sauce doesn't get you, the plumbing might. Dessert, you might get fruit, figs, dates, maybe grapes, but only if they're in season. Honey is the primary sweetener, used sparingly. Sugar doesn't exist in Rome. Cakes are made with nuts, flour, honey, and oil. They're dense and oily, not fluffy or delicate. You finish your meal, your stomach feels strange. Not quite full, not quite empty. You have a salty, fermented aftertaste clinging to the roof of your mouth. There are no breath mints, no chewing gum, no coffee to wash it all down. You rinse your hands in a nearby fountain. The water smells slightly metallic. You ignore it. Your breath is garum. Your clothes smell like smoke and vinegar. Your belly is unsure whether to digest or reject what you've just given it. You survive the meal, but only just. And lunch will come soon enough. So you want to work in ancient Rome? Not because you want a career, or to follow a dream, or to express yourself. No. You want to work because if you don't, you might not eat. In ancient Rome, there are no safety nets, no unemployment checks, no pensions. If you are a free person, you work to survive. If you are a slave, you work because you must. In the range of jobs available, let's just say none of them come with benefits. Let's start with the most common kind of laborer, the urban poor. These are men and women who rise at dawn and seek work daily, often with no guarantee they'll find any. You might be hired to help carry goods from the docks, or to mix concrete, or to help build an aqueduct or repair a road. Your tools, your hands, maybe a shovel, pay a few copper coins. If you're lucky, your hours. From sunrise until sundown, breaks are rare. There is no lunch hour. You eat on the go, maybe with one hand, while holding a tool with the other. There are no labor laws. If you get injured, you're sent away. No sick leave. No medical help. If you can't work, you don't matter. Maybe you're a messenger. Sounds simple, right? Walk from one part of the city to another. Deliver a scroll or a message. But the city is enormous, crowded, and chaotic. You navigate tight alleys, jostle through throngs of people, and dodge carts, animals, and sewage. You're always on your feet, always being yelled at. Always at risk of delivering the wrong message, or missing someone entirely. If you fail, you might be beaten, fired, or worse, ignored, which means unpaid. Perhaps you're a cleaner. Cleaner in ancient Rome doesn't mean mopping polished floors. It means scrubbing public latrines, collecting garbage, hauling waste, or tending the communal bathhouse, all while inhaling a stew of foul odors and dealing with the filth of thousands. Again, no gloves, no masks, no protection. You're exposed to everything all the time. If you're a woman, you might work as a spinner, a weaver, a cook, or a seller of herbs in the market. You might help in a bakery, or wash clothes in a taverna courtyard. Your hands red and raw from scrubbing, but you might do something else. Less legal, more desperate. Prostitution is widespread, regulated, taxed, but protection, respect none. Now imagine being a slave. You don't get to choose your job. You might be in a villa, serving wine and food, dressing your master, or helping your mistress with her hair. Or you could be in a mine, deep underground, hammering rock for 10 hours a day in near total darkness, breathing dust, drinking foul water. The average life expectancy for a slave in the mines. You might be trained to fight as a gladiator. The crowds will cheer. The emperor might even watch, but your life hangs on the tip of a sword. You eat well, but every meal could be your last. Your body is bruised and cut. Your nights are filled with pain, and freedom is promised but rarely given. Some slaves work in the city. They run shops, handle accounts, even act as tutors to Roman children. These are considered elite positions, but you are still property, can be sold, beaten, branded. Your talents do not belong to you. Perhaps you dream bigger. Perhaps you're an artisan, potter, a mason, a sculptor. These are respectable trades. You might even own a small workshop, but competition is fierce. Materials are expensive. Patrons are fickle. One bad month and you could be in debt. And Roman debtors are not treated kindly. You might become a merchant. Sell grain, oil, or wine. Rent a stall in the forum. But you must bribe officials, avoid thieves, and compete with larger shops backed by the rich. Your profit margins are razor thin. Spoilage, fire, or theft can wipe you out overnight. Speaking of the rich, they don't work. Not in the sense you understand. Senator or equestrian might own vast estates and hundreds of slaves. He might give speeches, oversee politics, or lend money at interest. But he does not labor. He does not sweat. His work is leisurely, and his wealth protects him. There is no social mobility in Rome unless you are astonishingly lucky or obscenely cunning. Most people are born into their class and remain there. A poor child becomes a poor adult. Slave remains a slave unless freed. And even then, a freedman holds second-class status. Your clothes reflect your job. If you're a worker, you wear a short tunic. Functional, dirty, often patched. Sandals with thin soles. No jewelry, no perfume, just the smell of the street and your own sweat. Your hands are calloused. Your back aches. You sleep light and wake early. You eat little and complain less. You're not dreaming of retirement. You're dreaming of surviving one more week, one more month. Maybe, if the gods are kind, one more year. Because work in Rome, it's not about fulfillment. It's about survival. You're heading out. Maybe you're looking for work. Maybe you need water. Maybe you're just trying to buy some bread. Whatever the reason, you open the creaky wooden door to your insula, step out onto the street, and the city swallows you whole. Welcome to a Roman street. It is not a quiet or relaxing place. The first thing you notice is the noise. Rome is a city of over 1 million people, and they are all awake. All talking, all shouting. The sound of conversation, cartwheels on cobblestone, the crack of whips, barking dogs, bleating goats, and hawkers shouting their wares blends into a chaotic symphony. There are no sidewalks. No. The street is shared by everyone: pedestrians, animals, carts, and waste. The paving stones beneath your sandals are uneven and often slick with water, mud, or worse. Gutter channels run down the middle of most streets, designed to carry away waste. But these channels often clog. The result? A shallow river of filth. This river carries everything: rainwater, bathwater, dishwater, urine, spoiled wine, fish guts, rotting vegetables, human waste. You walk carefully, trying to avoid the worst puddles. Some people wear high wooden sandals called smelly to elevate themselves above the muck. You probably can't afford those. You hold your tunic slightly up. It doesn't help. A cart passes by at speed, splashing the gutter up onto your leg. You try not to gag. You tell yourself it was only water, but you know better. The carts themselves are a hazard. They are often overloaded and pulled by mules or donkeys that relieve themselves freely as they go. There is no traffic law, no right of way. If you're in the way, you're shouted at. If you don't move fast enough, you get hit. The smell of the street is overwhelming. A mixture of smoke from cooking fires, spoiled meat, fresh manure, fermented fish sauce, sweat, and incense wafts through the air. It hangs low, especially on warm days. You learn to breathe through your mouth, or not breathe at all. Vendors crowd the edges of the road, yell over each other to advertise their goods. Bread, dates, olives, dried figs, secondhand tunics, sandals, cooking pots, cheap perfume, street food. The aroma of roasting meat mixes with the pungency of urine. You see a butcher cleaning his table with vinegar, shooing away flies. There is no ice. The meat has been out for hours. He gestures to a slab of goat, half covered with a cloth. You move on. There are beggars in the corners. Children with hollow eyes. Men missing limbs. Women wrapped in rags. Some plead quietly. Others shout curses at passers-by. There is no welfare, no help. You either give a coin or you keep walking. At the next corner, a small crowd gathers. A man performs acrobatics with torches. Another plays a double pipe flute. The music is shrill and fast. A boy dances beside him. Coins clink into a bowl. The air is electric with laughter and tension. You pass under a balcony. A chamber pot empties above you. You jump back just in time. Not everyone is so lucky. Splash zones are common. People learn to walk closer to the walls. Not because they're safer, but because they offer a better view of falling danger. There are thieves too. Pickpockets are common. Keep your hand near your coin pouch, if you have one. Even rich citizens aren't safe. Gangs of young men roam the streets at night. Fights break out without warning. The police, there are some, but they mostly protect the rich. The street is also a place of announcements. You pass a wall with fresh paint. Notices of executions, games, auctions, and elections. Symbols of candidates scratched next to promises in red paint. There are graffiti, too, poetry, insults, and political slogans. Some crude, some clever. You pass a temple. Incense curls into the air. A priest chants softly. A small altar holds offerings. A loaf of bread, a few flowers, a bronze coin. You nod in respect. You never know which god is watching. As the day heats up, the crowd thickens. Children play with hoops and sticks. Merchants argue over stall space. A man with a monkey on a leash asks if you want your fortune told. You decline. He shrugs. By mid-morning, you're sweating, covered in dust. Your feet ache, your ears ring. You haven't even reached your destination yet. The roaming street is a daily gauntlet. You run it because you have to. There are no quiet paths, no clean lanes, silent corners. Rome does not whisper, it roars. If you can still hear your own thoughts, you're not really in it. You finally made it through the chaos of the street. You're hot, you're filthy, your sandals are caked in muck. Your tunic clings to your skin, and you smell like a combination of goat, vinegar, and fear. So you do what a respectable Roman would do. You go to the baths. This sounds like a good idea. till you realize what Roman hygiene actually looks like. First, the baths are not some quiet oasis. They're public, crowded, noisy, and very much a social experience. You do not come here for solitude. You come to be seen, to talk politics, make deals, flirt, argue, and, if you're lucky, get a little clean in the process. You pay a small fee to enter. Slaves and freedmen attend to you, if you can afford them. If not, you strip down and carry your belongings in a little basket. Theft is common. If you lose your sandals, you're walking home barefoot. Good luck with that. The first room is the appetiterium, the changing area. You disrobe here, and it's immediately awkward. The air is thick with humidity, chatter, and the smell of hundreds of sweating bodies. Try to avoid eye contact. Next is the tepidarium, the warm room. You're already sweating. But now you sit in this stone room where the air is heated from underneath by a clever system called a hypocaust. It's ingenious. It's also oppressive. The warmth opens your pores. It also intensifies the smell of everyone around you. Then comes the caldarium, the hot room. This is where the steam is thickest, where the heat is stifling. There's a hot plunge pool, and a large bronze brazier adds to the furnace-like temperature. You sit, trying not to pass out. You're surrounded by naked men discussing politics, philosophy, and gladiator fights. Scraping comes next. Romans don't use soap. Instead, you oil your skin, olive oil usually, and then scrape the grime away with a curved metal tool called a strigil. If you're poor, you do it yourself. If you're rich, a slave does it for you. Either way, this is unpleasant. The oil loosens the dirt. The strigil collects sweat, oil, skin, and grime. Ow. There is no private shower. The filth is dumped in a communal basin or wiped onto a cloth. No, they don't clean the strigil between users. Now you step into the hot plunge. The water is cloudy. It has a film. It is communal. You try not to think about what's floating in it. After you cook for a bit, you move on to the frigidarium, the cold plunge. It's shocking, bone-chilling, but also refreshing. You dunk yourself, emerge gasping. This is probably the cleanest you'll feel all day. After the bath comes the oiling, the scraping again, and maybe a massage if you're wealthy. Fragrant oils, if you can afford them, mask the lingering stink. Some Romans even get their armpits plucked here. You dry off with a rough cloth. You redress. You leave the bath not entirely clean, not entirely relaxed, but slightly less disgusting than before. That's the goal. Outside, vendors sell snacks, boiled eggs, lentil soup, sweetened dates. You buy one. The egg is cold. The date is sour. You eat it anyway. Here's the thing. Romans go to the baths almost daily. It's part of life. A place to clean yourself, but also to socialize, to network, to unwind. It's normal, it's expected, and it is absolutely a sensory overload. Modern hygiene, private showers, toothpaste, shampoo, toilet paper, none of that exists. You scrape, you oil, you sweat, you scrape again. You try not to step in someone else's bathwater on the way out. You're sick or injured. Maybe your foot got stepped on by a cart. Maybe you ate something that didn't agree with you, or maybe you just have a fever. What do? Welcome to Roman healthcare, where the cure might be worse than the illness. First off, forget the idea of hospitals as you know them. There are a few military hospitals for soldiers, but for civilians, you're mostly on your own, or at the mercy of local healers, herbalists, or if you're lucky and wealthy, a medicus, a Roman physician. Let's say you're rich. You summon a medicus to your home. You might be trained in Alexandria or Athens, steeped in Galenic theory. Sounds promising, not quite. He believes your body is ruled by 4 humors: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. Illness means one of those is out of balance. So what does he do? Bleeds you. Yes, he cuts your arm, lets the blood drip into a bowl, and watches it for signs. Thickness, color, how it clots. He might also use leeches. Too much phlegm, you get a purgative to vomit or evacuate your bowels. Too much bile, be both, have a headache. He might drill a small hole in your skull. Trepanation. Yes, this is a thing. Many Roman doctors double as barbers or butchers. Surgical instruments include forceps, scalpels, hooks, and bone saws. They are rarely cleaned. Anesthesia? None. Just wine or opium if you're lucky. Screaming is common. Infection is expected. Now let's say you're poor. You can't afford a medicus. You go to a herbalist, or maybe you just tough it out. Your grandmother gives you a concoction of boiled herbs, dried lizard tail, and wine. You get told to sleep with a laurel leaf under your pillow, or place a charm under your tongue. The gods are involved in all of this. You might pray to Aesculapius, the god of medicine, or go to his temple, hoping for a divine dream cure. Sometimes snakes roam freely inside these healing temples. They are considered sacred. One slithers across you in your sleep. That's a good sign. Toothache? The remedy might be a paste of crushed mouse brains, or cauterization with a red-hot iron. Eye problems. How about a salve made of honey, lead, and ashes? Broken bones? They might set it with splints, but no x-rays. No antibiotics. If it gets infected, they may amputate.
Out with a saw.
While you're awake. Women in labor? There's no prenatal care? No sanitary birth rooms? Midwives are your best hope. Mortality rates for mothers and infants are terrifyingly high. Mental health? Forget it. You're possessed, lazy, or cursed. Treatment might involve isolation, beatings, or prayer. Even elite Romans suffered. Emperor Augustus had chronic health issues. Julius Caesar had seizures. Many turned to mineral baths, spells, or astrology. Asterisk, and hygiene. Asterisk, doctors rarely wash their hands. Instruments are reused. Bandages are cloth, sometimes reused too. Infection is a killer. Tetanus, sepsis, gangrene, common. There are a few bright spots. Romans understood the importance of clean water. Aqueducts brought fresh water to cities. They believed in bathing, even if their methods were crude. And some herbs they used actually worked, like willow bark. But on the whole, getting sick in Rome is a gamble. Odds are, you won't get better. And if you do, it's not because of the treatment. It's in spite of it. Clutch your stomach, sip a foul herbal tonic, pray to Aesculapius, and hope you live to see tomorrow. You've been accused of stealing a loaf of bread. Or maybe a neighbor claims you broke a contract, or worse, you insulted a Roman senator. Whatever the accusation, you're now about to discover that Roman justice is fast, public, and utterly unforgiving. First off, there's no police force. It's not in the way we think of it. The Roman Republic, and later, the Empire, relied on lictors' vigils, private citizens to enforce law and order. The lictors served magistrates. The vigils were like firemen, night watchmen, and part-time peacekeepers rolled into one. But if a crime happens, it's largely your responsibility to bring it to court's accusations and status. If someone accuses you, they file a charge. If you're a Roman citizen, you get a hearing. If not, good luck. The rights of the accused vary wildly depending on status, wealth, gender, and citizenship. Let's say you're a Roman citizen. You have the right to defend yourself in court. That's great, except you need to be eloquent, persuasive, and well-connected. Rich citizens hire advocati or trained orators. If you're poor, you're on your own. No public defender. The court is not a solemn courtroom. It's held in public forums, often outdoors. Spectators jeer, cheer, or throw things. Judges are senators or magistrates. Bribes are common. Evidence? Testimonies, character witnesses, maybe some written records. No forensic science. No fingerprints. No CCTV. Punishment by class. Now here's where it gets brutal. Punishments are sharply divided by status. Asterisk if you're an elite citizen, fines, exile, or house arrest. A poor citizen, beatings, hard labor, or worse, a slave. Expect torture, be crucifixion. Execution methods are varied and imaginative. Beheading is for nobles. Crucifixion is reserved for slaves, rebels, and the lowest of the low. Some are thrown to wild animals in the arena, others are burned alive. There's a law called lex talionis, the law of retaliation, eye for an eye. So if you maim someone, expect to be maimed. Debt can't pay, you might be enslaved. Yes, debt slavery exists. Petty crime and public shame. Petty crimes like theft or vandalism could lead to flogging. Public humiliation is common. You might be paraded through the streets with signs around your neck describing your crime. False accusers can also be punished. That requires proof, which is hard to come by. Women and justice. Women can't represent themselves in court. They need a male guardian. Their testimony often carries less weight. Accused of adultery, death, or exile. But if your husband cheats, that's just boys being boys. Slaves and the lost slaves have no legal rights. They can be tortured for testimony. If a slave kills a master, the entire household of slaves, even children, can be executed. Collectively, just to make a point. Spectacle and fear trials can be public spectacles, especially under emperors like Nero or Caligula. A trial isn't just about justice. It's about power, about fear, about showing the mob what happens to dissenters. In some cases, there is trial by combat, or an ordeal, like holding a hot iron. If you don't burn, the gods have judged you innocent. Unsurprisingly, you usually burn. You're convicted back to your bread theft. You plead your case. No lawyer. The magistrate doesn't believe you, or doesn't care. Maybe your accuser bribed him. You're sentenced to flogging, or hard labor in the mines. If you're a foreigner, maybe execution. You're shackled, paraded, beaten. It's swift and public.
Ow.
Roman justice isn't blind. It sees your status, your wealth, your connections, and punishes accordingly. Welcome to the Roman legal system. You won't last a day. You thought you'd find a cozy little place to stay while visiting ancient Rome. Maybe. A charming apartment with a mosaic floor and a view of the Forum. What you get instead is an overcrowded, crumbling fire hazard packed with strangers and vermin. Welcome to the insulae, the Roman equivalent of budget housing, and a place that practically guarantees you won't make it through the night. The Insula experience in Insula is not a single-family home. It's more like a multi-story apartment block, hastily built with wood and cheap brick. The rich live in private villas. The rest of Rome's teeming population, laborers, artisans, migrants, and freedmen, crowd into these vertical slums. The ground floor might house shops or taverns, but you can't afford that. You're up near the top, 5th or 6th floor. There's no elevator. Just narrow, uneven stairs. Good luck carrying water or firewood. Fire traps and collapsing ceilings. Roman fire codes are virtually non-existent. The insulae are jam-packed together. Wooden beams, thatched roofs, open flames from oil lamps and cooking fires. Fires are frequent and devastating. A single careless moment and the entire block could be up in flames. The Great Fire of Rome in 64 CE started in or near an insula. It destroyed large parts of the city. Worse, the buildings often collapse. Builders cut corners to save money. Some insulae are 6 or 7 stories high with no proper foundations. There are reports of entire buildings crumbling under their own weight. There are no safety inspectors. The landlord's rich, he might bribe someone to keep quiet. It's crowded and filthy privacy. Forget it. You share your room with family or strangers. Walls are thin. You hear everything, smell everything. There are no bathrooms. Residents use chamber pots and empty them out the window. Sometimes with a yell, sometimes not. The streets below stink of human waste, rotting food, and animal dung. It's loud. This city never sleeps. There's always shouting, clanging, animals braying, someone getting stabbed. Water and waste aqueducts bring water to fountains in the city. But your insula doesn't have plumbing. You fetch water from a public fountain and carry it up 5 flights. You're lucky if it's clean. Wastewater pools and alleys. Sewers exist, but they're limited and prone to backing up. Pests, disease, and death rats, fleas, cockroaches, lice, mosquitoes, and disease. Lots of disease. Respiratory infections from the smoke and dust. Diarrhea from dirty water. Tuberculosis. Typhoid. No antibiotics. No antiseptic. No help. If someone gets sick, They just die, or suffer until they do. There are no emergency services. If there's a fire or a collapse, the vigils might show up. If they're sober, if they care, if the building isn't already gone. Crime and corruption insulae are perfect hiding spots for pickpockets, thieves, and fugitives. Crime is rampant. If someone robs you or stabs you, there's no recourse. You're just another nobody in the city. Bribery and corruption are common. Your landlord doesn't fix anything. The stairs are broken. The roof leaks. Tough. And the rent it's still due. If you can't pay, you're thrown out. Winter and summer and winter, the insula is freezing. No insulation. No central heating. Maybe a small brazier. A fire hazard in itself. In summer, it's a suffocating oven. The upper floor is trap heat. There's no ventilation. The air is thick, smoky, and full of stench. If you're lucky, if you re-fortunate, and that S a big if. You might survive a few months without a catastrophe. Maybe you even get a slightly sturdier room with a small window. But don't let your guard down. The neighbor's kid might knock over a lamp. The floor might give out beneath you. A rat might chew through your food supply. Living in a Roman insula isn't just uncomfortable. It's dangerous. It's unsanitary. It's loud. It's flammable. That's all you've got. So next time you complain about your cramped studio apartment, remember this. At least your ceiling isn't about to cave in while you're asleep. If you thought living in ancient Rome was hard, try doing it as a woman. The idea of equality, or even basic autonomy, didn't tea exist for women in the Roman Empire? You were considered property of your father, then your husband, and eventually your son. Your life was confined, controlled, and often cruel. The toga may have been a symbol of Roman identity, but it was strictly for men. You, as a woman, wore the stola, a long dress of modesty, submission, and silence. You belonged to a man, always from birth to death. A woman in Rome was legally and socially tied to a man. As a girl, your father had patria potestas, absolute control over you. He could decide who you married and when. He could even kill you legally if you brought shame upon the family. Marriage wasn't about love. It was about alliance and property. You might be married off at age 12 to a man decades older than you. Consent was irrelevant. You were handed over like livestock. Once married, your husband became your new legal guardian. If you were lucky, you married sin manu, meaning your property remained your own, and you legally stayed under your father's control. That was considered progressive. Life is domestic, and that's it. Your role was clear. Stay indoors, produce heirs, and run the household. The domus was your entire universe. Cooking, cleaning, spinning wool, raising children, that was your domain. You weren't allowed to vote. You weren't allowed to hold public office. You weren't allowed to speak in court. Even in religion, where Roman women had some participation, your role was symbolic and secondary. You might serve as a priestess, if you were a virgin or widow, but you were always subordinate to male priests. Clothing, conduct, and control. A Roman woman was judged heavily by her appearance and behavior. Modesty was paramount. You wore a stola to show chastity, and a veil called a palla in public. Stepping outside without a veil, scandalous. Speaking too loudly, shameful. Laughing in public, unbecoming. Roman society valued women who were silent, obedient, and invisible. Even your name wasn't truly yours. Women didn't have first names. You were named after your father's clan. If your father's name was Julius, you'd be called Julia. If there were multiple daughters, you'd be Julia Major, Julia Minor, and so on. Motherhood. A risky mandate childbirth was expected, constant and deadly. Women were expected to bear many children, but Roman medicine was primitive. There were no antiseptics, no cesareans, no pain relief. The maternal mortality rate was high, so was infant mortality. But the pressure to produce a son was immense. Having a girl wasn't celebrated. It was a disappointment if you rebel. Good luck. What if you didn't want to follow the rules? If you resisted your father's authority or your husband's control, you risked being disowned, beaten, or worse. There were no domestic abuse protections, no legal recourse. The law was on his side. Adultery, a death sentence, literally. A woman caught cheating could be killed by her husband. A man caught cheating is just frowned upon, unless the affair was with another man's wife. Even if you divorced, the children stayed with the father. you've lost everything. It's the exception, but not the rule. Yes, a few wealthy Roman women wielded influence behind the scenes. Livia, the wife of Augustus, had political sway. Some elite women ran businesses or owned property, but they were exceptions, and often resented for it. Their freedom was still fragile and dependent on male protection. And yes, the Vestal virgins, priestesses of Vesta, had unique legal independence. But they had to serve for 30 years, remain virgins, and could be buried alive if they broke their vows. Slavery made it worse. If you were an enslaved woman, your life was even more horrific. You had no rights at all. You could be sold, beaten, raped, or killed at your master's whim. You weren't even considered fully human. Female slaves were used for household labor, field work, and sexual exploitation. If you bore a child, that child was automatically a slave, a woman's place. Anywhere but Rome, you wouldn't last a day as a woman in ancient Rome. The lack of rights, the constant surveillance, the daily risk of violence or death, the complete absence of autonomy. You weren't a person, you were property, wrapped in fabric, silenced by tradition, and trapped by law. So the next time you feel frustrated with modern-day inequality, just remember, at least you can own your own name. You think reality TV is mind-numbing? Imagine watching someone being mauled by a lion before breakfast. Entertainment. Ancient Rome was brutal, bloody, and disturbingly popular. It wasn't just distraction, it was doctrine. The Roman elite perfected the concept of panem and circenses, bred in circuses, to pacify the masses. And it worked. But step into the Colosseum as a modern soul, you wouldn't last a moment. The gladiators staged the Colosseum, also called the Flavian Amphitheater, wasn't a sports stadium, it was a slaughterhouse of spectacle, capable of seating 50,000 people. It hosted games where men fought to the death for public amusement. These gladiators were often slaves, prisoners of war, or criminals, trained to kill or die in choreographed bloodletting. And the crowd? Wild, cheering, betting, jeering, their mood could decide a man's fate. If a gladiator fell, the emperor might raise his thumb or turn it down. The audience thrived on violence. It wasn't a game, it was national identity. You, a modern viewer, would be horrified. The smell of blood, screams, the casual execution of unarmed prisoners. And that was just before lunch. Animal hunts. Massacres in the morning before the main gladiator bouts. Romans enjoyed venations, exotic animal hunts. Lions, elephants, bears, leopards, all captured from across the empire, were set loose to be killed by trained hunters called bestiarii. Sometimes the animals killed each other. Sometimes condemned criminals were thrown in without weapons. These weren't battles, they were executions. Imagine watching a giraffe being disemboweled for entertainment. Children were there. Vendors sold food. The show went on for hours. Public executions. Theater of Death Romans didn't just execute people, they turned it into art. Condemned criminals were killed in reenactments of myths. A man playing Prometheus might be chained and have his liver eaten by a real eagle. A woman playing Deers might be tied to a bull. It was theater, and it was real. Execution was entertainment. People brought their families, they clapped. Chariot racing NASCAR with fatalities at the Circus Maximus. Over 150,000 people could gather to watch chariot races. The most popular sport in Rome, teams had fanatical followers. Drivers were rock stars. But the races were dangerous. Crashes, known as naufragia, were frequent and deadly. Imagine watching a driver dragged behind a horse while the crowd cheers. And yes, people bet their life savings on outcomes. Riots broke out over team rivalries. Dinner theater. With vomit and blood, if you thought things got calmer at Roman dinner parties, think again. Convivia often included performers, musicians, and jesters. Some enslaved, some mutilated for effect. Food was served between rounds of lewd poetry, mock gladiator fights, and erotic storytelling. The elite gorged themselves, vomiting to make room for more. Wine flowed. Morality evaporated. And you, a modern guest, would be stunned by the sheer vulgarity. They loved it. Rome was built on conquest, cruelty, and control. Attainment reflected those values. Death wasn't hidden. It was flaunted. Pain was normalized. Brutality was virtue. The average Roman believed these shows reinforced moral lessons: courage, endurance, loyalty. Killing wasn't just accepted, it was glorified. If you objected, you're weak. There were critics. Philosophers like Seneca and early Christians condemned the violence. But they were mocked as soft un-Roman. Compassion wasn't a virtue in the arena. Excitement was. A ticket to the front row of horror, you, a modern visitor, might be handed a piece of bread, a seat in the stands, and a cheerful program listing today's deaths. You'd sit beside cheering citizens as a tiger dismembers a man. You'd hear music play as a criminal is crucified. You'd be offered more wine, and you'd want to scream, but they'd just look at you funny. It wouldn't last an hour. You've seen it in movies: the gleaming armor, the polished shields, the Roman legion marching in perfect unison beneath red standards bearing the letters SPQR, the proud Roman soldier. Symbol of order and power, disciplined and deadly. It's tempting to imagine yourself as one of them, brave, respected, unstoppable, dull. But if you woke up as a Roman soldier, you wouldn't last a day, because beneath the armor and fanfare was a brutal world of pain, exhaustion, violence, and death, all in the name of Rome. You don't enlist. You're drafted unless you were part of the wealthy elite or managed to bribe your way out. Roman military service wasn't optional, it was mandatory, especially for young land-owning men. Later, under the empire, the legions became more professionalized. Enlisting became more common among the lower classes. But for centuries, joining the army meant sacrificing your freedom and potentially your life. There was no modern boot camp. Training was intense, endless, and merciless. March 20th miles a day, in sandals, in full gear. Practice stabbing dummies, not with wide slashes, but straight thrusts, because Romans stab, Greeks slash, and if your performance faltered. Training as pain. Roman training was a constant test of endurance. You'd march for hours carrying over 40 kilograms of gear. Your sandals, caligae, rubbed your feet raw. There were no cushioned boots, no shock absorbers, just open-toe shoes and endless stone roads. Food was basic: barley, vinegar water, some beans if you were lucky. You learned how to build fortifications every night: ditches, palisades, watchtowers. After marching all day, and you weren't just expected to fight, you were expected to build roads, bridges, siege engines, aqueducts, forts. You were a soldier, yes, but also a carpenter, a mason, a ditch digger. Sick, injured, too bad. Medical treatment was crude. You might get cauterized. You might get amputated. You might be bled, or more often left behind to die. The discipline is deadly. The Roman army was famous for discipline, and that discipline came with terror. Step out of line, floggings, disobey an order, beating desert, execution. And then there was decimation, the punishment for cowardice or mutiny. 1 in every 10 soldiers in a disgraced unit was chosen at random and clubbed to death by the other 9. Let that sink in. You could be the best soldier in your unit, but if your cohort failed in battle, you might die. Not from the enemy's sword, but from your friend's club. Glory? Try 25 years of service. You didn't just serve a few years and go home. Under the empire, legionaries were expected to serve 25 years. 25 years of marching, bleeding, digging, sweating. You were paid poorly, taxed constantly, and sent far from home, to Britain, Syria, Gaul, Egypt, anywhere Rome needed a sword. And when your time was up, you might be granted land and Roman citizenship. That's if you survived. Most didn't. There were no vacations, no leaves, no phone calls home. You might not see your family again ever. Letters took months. Some were never delivered. If you got sick or injured and couldn't perform your duties, you were often discharged with nothing. No pension, no support. Battle is chaos. Now let's say you make it to the battlefield. Maybe you're part of the famed Legio X. Maybe your centurion slaps your helmet and shouts, "Hold the line." The enemy approaches. You tighten your grip on your gladius. The horns blare. You're not fighting one-on-one. Shh. You're in a wall of men, shoulder to shoulder, thrusting blindly forward. The noise is deafening. You can't hear orders, can't even breathe. blood sprays. Your comrade falls. You step over his body. You're shoved from behind. If you break formation, you're dead. If you hold formation, you might be dead anyway. Chariots, cavalry, flaming arrows, siege engines. Roman battles weren't clean or fair. They were meat grinders. You smell iron, blood, and excrement. You feel bodies slam into you. You don't feel heroic. You feel like an animal in a cage. Life in the provinces when you weren't fighting, you were stationed in some far-off province, guarding a wall in freezing Britannia, patrolling the deserts of Syria, waiting for uprisings in Judea. You slept in tents or stone barracks, dealt with local rebellions. You worked endless construction projects. You were often hated by the locals. You were the face of imperial oppression, and you couldn't marry, at least officially. Many soldiers took local wives and had children, but they were considered illegitimate. You weren't allowed to legally settle down until retirement. If you're not Roman, it's worse if you were an auxiliary. A non-Roman recruited into the army. Your life was even harder. You were paid less, treated as expendable, used for the most dangerous assignments. You were promised citizenship. If you survived your 25 years of service, if you didn't, too bad. Retirement. If you make it, let's say you beat the odds. You survived 2.5 decades of war, hunger, exhaustion, and disease. You're discharged. You receive a small grant of land, often in a frontier province. Settle down. Try to farm. You might have chronic pain, wounds that never healed, nightmares. You're in your mid-40s, considered old by Roman standards. Your friends are all dead or missing. The country you served often forgets you. There are no parades, no medals, no therapy. You're a used tool. Why you wouldn't last a day in the Roman military. Not because you're weak, but because modern life has softened us. The Roman army was an institution designed not just to kill the enemy, but to crush the man. Every day was a battle, against the enemy, against nature, against your own body. The discipline, the brutality, the suffering, it wasn't accidental. It was the backbone of the greatest military machine the ancient world ever knew. But if you were dropped into that world, a world of blood, sweat, and endless marching, you'd beg to go home before the first night fell. You might think religion in the Roman era was quaint marble statues, incense, and a few priests in togas mumbling prayers in Latin. Maybe some temples, some candles, a few offerings to Jupiter or Mars. That's the kind of religion we picture when we imagine Rome. Neat, orderly, picturesque. Like a calendar photo of ancient ruins bathed in sunset. But for the people living in ancient Rome, religion was not a peaceful Sunday experience. It was a constant nagging presence in their lives, demanding, ritualistic, and loaded with fear. The gods weren't just worshipped, they were feared, bribed, appeased, and blamed. And if you were unlucky enough to be born in that world, you'd find yourself terrified of everything from sneezes to thunder to spilled wine. Let's begin. Every day begins with a plea. You wake up in a cramped insula room, barely lit by the morning sun filtering through a cloth window. Before your feet even touch the floor, you're thinking about the gods. Did you dream anything strange last night? Is that owl you heard a bad omen? Better check the household shrine, the lararium. You mutter a prayer to your Lares. Maybe burn a pinch of incense if you have it. You promise them you'll sweep the floor extra well today, or pour a bit of your wine for them at dinner. You're not especially devout. You're just scared. Because in Rome, ignoring the gods wasn't just careless, it was dangerous. Everything you do, from stepping into the street to buying bread, is watched by divine forces. Any misstep, literal or symbolic, could doom your day, or your family, or the entire city. So you say your prayers, not out of love, but out of habit or survival. The gods are many, and they are everywhere. There are gods for everything. It's not just war and love and the sky-butt door hinges. Grain storage, it's trash heaps, mildew, toothaches. There's a god for your pantry, a goddess for your sewer, another one for the cracks in your wall. The official Roman pantheon has dozens of major deities: Jupiter, Juno, Mars, Venus, Neptune, Pluto, but there are hundreds more in daily life, and each one wants something. you'd better remember to honor the right gods on the right days. Use the correct wording in your prayers. Make your sacrifices the right way. Spill wine the wrong direction. That's bad luck. Forget to cover your head during a ritual that could offend the gods and ruin the entire ceremony. And if something goes wrong in your life, don't blame fate. You'll assume you forgot to honor someone, or worse, you angered them. Public religion. State and sacrifice. Now imagine you work near the Roman Forum. Every other day, there's a public religious event. Not a quiet mass. These are full-scale ceremonies. Processions, animal sacrifices, chanting horn players, priests known as pontifices and augurs performing complex rituals. The smell of burning entrails fills the air. See the priests slice open a bull. Blood sprays on the altar. They examine the liverius, the actual liver to read omens. Is it a good shape? Does it glisten correctly? Are there marks or spots? The future of a military campaign might depend on it. And guess what? If the ritual goes wrong, or even feels wrong, it must be done again. Start to finish. The gods demand perfection. Public religion isn't separate from politics. It is politics. Emperors are declared gods after death. High-ranking officials often serve as priests. And if you refuse to participate, that's suspicious. Maybe even treasonous. Even Christians in the early centuries weren't persecuted for believing in Jesus. They were targeted for refusing to sacrifice to Roman gods. Because in Rome, religion was about order. It was about keeping the gods happy so they wouldn't smite the empire with famine or plague or invasion. You want to stay out of it, too bad. Participation is mandatory. Superstition is a way of life. Now let's talk about daily superstition. It's not just a few silly beliefs, it's a lifestyle. Black cat crosses your path. Omen. Thunder during a meeting, cancel everything. You stub your toe on the temple steps. The god is mad at you. Romans are constantly reading signs. Birds flying east mean one thing. Birds flying west mean another. Sneeze during a conversation might mean the gods are affirming what was just said. Better pause and think. You might carry amulets, good luck charms, phallic symbols to ward off evil. If you're pregnant, you'll wear a bula magical locket to protect your unborn child. You'll avoid stepping over thresholds with your left foot. You spit on the ground to ward off the evil eye. Everything is a sign. Everything might mean something. Foreign cults and imported fears. Rome isn't isolated. It's a sprawling empire, so its people absorb religions from everywhere. Egypt gives them Isis. Persia gives them Mithras. Judea gives them Yahweh. Eventually, Christianity begins to spread. Many of these cults are mystery religions, private, secretive, promising salvation and an afterlife. That's very different from Roman religion, which focuses more on this life than the next. These cults often involve secret initiations, symbolic meals, and whispered prayers. The state doesn't like them, not because of the beliefs, but because secrecy is dangerous. Religion is supposed to be public, predictable, and controlled, not emotional and private. So you might have neighbors whispering about salvation, life after death, or holy resurrection. But you also know these people could be arrested. And you're just trying to keep the Larrys happy so your grain doesn't spoil. Nightmares and omens, you have a bad dream. A snake slithering under your bed, you wake up sweating. It's not just a dream, it's a message. You run to a Haruspexa dream interpreter. Maybe you sacrifice a chicken. Maybe you throw dice. Maybe you consult the Sibylline books, the ancient text said, to hold the secrets of Rome's destiny. Nothing in your life is ordinary. Every shadow, every accident, every bad harvest is divine communication. If you live in the countryside, it's worse. You hear strange sounds, you see lights in the woods. You bury dolls to protect your crops. You fear the Lemures, angry spirits of the dead who weren't properly buried. You stay up during the Lemuria festival, tossing black beans behind you to keep ghosts away. You wouldn't last a day in Roman religion, not because you don't believe in gods, but because you're not used to living in fear of them every second. Your modern life gives you peace from superstition. You don't sacrifice chickens to pass an exam. You don't blame a thunderstorm on improper prayer. You don't live every moment believing the world is a chessboard for divine grudges. Okay. But in Rome, the gods are always watching. And they're not just judging, they're punishing. Constantly. Forget to bow your head. Spill your wine the wrong way. speak during a ritual. You might have just doomed your whole block. When you imagine childhood in ancient Rome, you might picture a barefoot child running through a marble courtyard, tossing a wooden ball, laughing under the Mediterranean sun. Maybe they're practicing Latin grammar in a tunic while a loving tutor looks on. Maybe they're the child of a senator, sipping watered wine and listening to their father recite Cicero. That image did exist for a tiny, elite slice of Roman society. But for the other 90% of Roman children, childhood was brutal, short, and uncertain. Let's set the record straight. If you were born in ancient Rome, the hardest part of your life was just starting to live, and if you managed to survive that, it was mostly downhill from there. Birth, if you're lucky, it begins with birth, and the odds are immediately against you. Rome had shockingly high infant mortality rates. In some parts of the empire, over 30% of children died before their first birthday. Nearly half of all children didn't make it to age 5. There were no hospitals, no prenatal vitamins, no sterilized delivery rooms. Births happened at home, with midwives who might have little training and even less help if something went wrong. If the mother started hemorrhaging or the baby was breached, there was often nothing anyone could do. If you were born healthy, you still weren't safe. You might be born into poverty, malnutrition, or slavery. And even then, there was one more hurdle to clear. Would your parents keep you? Because in Rome, it was legal and common for fathers to reject newborns. Exposure legal and lethal. Imagine you're born in a small Roman household. Your father looks you over. You're weak or deformed, or maybe just the third daughter when he only wanted one. He has the legal right to reject you, so he doesn't pick you up. That's the signal. You're taken outside, maybe to a hillside or a liand, left there to die. This was called exposure. And yes, it was perfectly legal. Some exposed babies were picked up by others, sometimes out of charity, sometimes to be raised as slaves or prostitutes, but many simply perished. This was your first test as a Roman child. It's just being allowed to live. Surviving the early years, let's say you were accepted and raised. You now face disease, dirty water, poor hygiene, and crowded living conditions. Parasites, fevers, infections, common, dangerous, and poorly treated. If your family was poor, you likely shared a bed with multiple siblings and maybe animals. Your food, bread, thin gruel, or olives if you were lucky. Malnutrition stunted growth and weakened immune systems. To protect you, your parents might tie charms to your clothing. You'd wear a bulla special amulet worn around your neck to ward off evil spirits. This wasn't superstition to them, it was insurance. But the bulla could only do so much. Single fever could be fatal. Education, a privilege, not a right if you survived past infancy. Your life split depending on class. If you were born to a poor family, your education was your parents'. Maybe your mother taught you a few words. Maybe your father, if literate, taught you to count. But more likely, you were sent to work by age 6 or 7, carrying water, cleaning, learning a trade. If you were enslaved, you began labor much earlier. Children were sent into mines or fields, were sold, whipped, rented, or discarded if they underperformed. If you were elite, really, elite you had tutors. It's maybe a Greek slave who taught you reading, rhetoric, and grammar. You studied Cicero and Virgil, wrote on wax tablets, and were trained to become a lawyer or politician. But even elite kids weren't coddled. Boys were trained for toughness. They were expected to fight too fast, to survive on little sleep. Pain was part of education. So were harsh discipline and public embarrassment. Work, marriage, and death, childhood as we know it today, barely existed in Rome. There was no adolescence, no teenage rebellion, no high school. By age 12, girls were considered marriageable. Many were married off by age 14 to men decades older than them. These marriages were often arranged, political, and entirely out of their control. Once married, a girl was considered an adult, responsible for running a household and bearing children often before her body was fully developed. Boys had a little more time. They might become apprentices, soldiers, or clerks by their mid-teens. By 17 or 18, they were full legal adults. And if you hadn't made it that far, well, many didn't. Slavery. Born and raised in chains. If you were born into slavery, your childhood was stripped of even the few privileges available to freeborn Romans. You were property. You could be sold, beaten, starved, or abandoned. You had no legal family, no inheritance, no rights. Some children were born in the homes of wealthy owners and raised alongside their own children, but always as second class. Some were sold into households. Others worked on farms or mills. You might be branded or tattooed to mark ownership. You might be trained in a skill, but that was purely for your owner's benefit. And if you tried to escape, punishment was brutal. You could be killed for it. Religion and fear. Roman children were steeped in religion from birth. Every illness, accident, or nightmare was a sign from the gods. If you had night terrors, they were blamed on spirits. You might be forced to sleep with protective herbs, or have prayers chanted over your bed. You learned to fear ghosts, omens, eclipses, and the wrath of angry ancestors. There were few bedtime stories-only warnings. And when festivals came, they weren't for fun. They involved sacrifices, processions, and fear. Toys, games, and rare joy, despite the grim realities. Roman children did play when they could. They had toys, clay dolls, dice, wooden swords, marbles, and spinning tops. They played games like knucklebones, a primitive version of jacks. They drew on tiles with charcoal, played tag, and had races. But those were stolen moments brief. Fragile joys between chores, work, and survival. No birthday parties, no cartoons, no bubble baths. Just hard floors, cold winters, loud streets, and early responsibility. You wouldn't last a day as a Roman child. Not because you're weak, but because you've known too much softness. You expect comfort, protection, fairness. You had vaccinations, schooling, guardians. You had time to grow, to learn, to fail safely. Roman children had no such luxury. They were born into struggle, raised in danger, and expected to grow up fast, to die young. The playgrounds were streets, the lullabies were warnings, and the future wasn't promised. You made it through the day. Somehow you survived the dangers of the Roman era, the filth, the crowds, the sickness, the violence, the gods, and the soldiers. But now, as night falls, don't think your struggles are over, because in ancient Rome, death was not an escape. It was the beginning of another kind of suffering. Even in death, peace was rare. And for most people, the afterlife was a grim prospect. Let's explore why you wouldn't last a day, not just in life, but also in death in the Roman world. Death was everywhere. Death was never far in Roman cities and countryside alike. Infant mortality was high, accidents were common, and disease spread rapidly. Many died in their homes, surrounded by family or often alone, unloved. In the streets of Rome, death lurked beneath the surface. Bodies were carted away by night, sometimes dumped in mass graves or left to rot in public spaces before burial. Even funerals could be dangerous. Mourners might collapse under the weight of grief or in crowded processions. Dead bodies sometimes carried contagious diseases. Yet Romans had to honor the dead both to appease the gods and to keep the spirits calm. Burial or exposure. How your body was treated after death depended largely on your status. Elite Romans were buried in tombs along roads outside the city walls. These monuments were elaborate, meant to display wealth and status for eternity. Families paid to keep the memory of their ancestors alive. But for most, burial was simple or non-existent. The poor often used communal graves. Some bodies were cremated and ashes stored in urns, often forgotten or lost. And then there were those who were denied proper burial: slaves, criminals, suicides, and unwanted children. Their bodies might be exposed to the elements or tossed into unmarked pits. Without a proper burial, Romans believed your spirit couldn't rest. It would wander angry and forgotten. The underworld, a grim place. Roman beliefs about the afterlife were vague and terrifying. The underworld, Dorcas or Hades, was a shadowy, joyless place where spirits existed as mere shadows. There was no heaven or hell as we think of them today. No reward for good or punishment for evil. Instead, all souls were trapped in a gray existence. Only a few mythological heroes or favored individuals escaped this fate, traveling to the Elysian fields, a sort of paradise. For most, death meant darkness, silence, and endless wandering, ghosts and hauntings. Romans feared the dead more than we might imagine. Spirits of the improperly buried, or those who died violently, were believed to haunt the living. People reported ghost sightings. Families performed rituals to pacify restless spirits. Festivals like Lemuria involved tossing beans at night to drive away ghosts. You'd better honor your ancestors. Fail to do so, and their angry spirits might bring misfortune, illness, or madness. Funerary practices. A last struggle funerals were elaborate events. Professional mourners hired to wail loudly. Relatives wore special clothing. Bodies were adorned with garlands and coins placed on the eyes to pay Charon, the ferryman of the dead. If you were wealthy, you might even have a funeral procession through the city. But funerals cost money. Poor families struggled to pay. Some left their dead in open pits or relied on charity. Death was a final burden on the living, both emotional and financial. No medical care after death. In life, you might have suffered from disease and injury with minimal care, but in death, there was no relief, no mercy, no hope. Romans didn't believe in resurrection. Your body would decay. Your soul lingered only as a faint echo. This bleak view made death an ever-present fear, why you wouldn't last even after death. You wouldn't last a day in the Roman world because even the promise of rest was fragile and uncertain. Life was brutal, and death brought little peace. Whether you died young or old, rich or poor, your final fate was bleak. You might be forgotten, unburied, or haunted by restless spirits. The Roman era was a world of constant struggle, where even death was no escape. Closing thoughts. So, why wouldn't you last a day in the Roman era? Because every moment from dawn to dusk and beyond was fraught with dangers, hardships, and fears unimaginable to us today. Your body and mind would be tested by filth, hunger, violence, superstition, and the ever-watchful eyes of gods and men. The Roman era was not a world for the faint of heart. It was a world where survival was uncertain and peace was a distant dream. And that's why, no matter how brave or strong you are, you wouldn't last a day in Rome.